Hello everyone and welcome back to the Youth Political Activism channel. Today we're going to be talking about the third in a four-part series of the Republican presidential debates. First one being in Wisconsin, second one Simi Valley in California, and then Wednesday night in Miami, Florida. And then the last one is scheduled for, I think, December 6th in Alabama. Just as a disclaimer, I just want to say that I think that this entire process is very unnecessary because we already know who's going to be the GOP candidate. It's going to be Donald Trump. He's absolutely destroying everyone on the stage in the polls. There's no reason. They're vying for second place. They're competing for the silver medal here. They're wasting their time, their money, the money of their supporters. It's all waste because nothing's going to go to any of them. They're not getting anywhere. And then we're going to talk about what each of these people wants in the race because they're not stupid. They can see the polls. They can do math at least. To some extent. Politicians aren't known for their mathematical skills, but they're not that stupid. Just going through the rundowns of the debate just for the sake of covering it. Again, I don't think that it's that important because we all know who's going to win. If you just look at the polls, you can see that Trump is absolutely destroying everyone. He keeps getting higher and higher in the race. Almost 60 points, and that's 60 points in total. 45 more than almost 45 more than even DeSantis, who is in second place, and then everyone else is negligible. But other than Trump, the main candidates were DeSantis, Haley, and Ramaswamy, and those three were the top contenders on the debate as well. So just as a summary of what happened, it's pretty interesting, I would argue. Again, I know that I was just destroying them and how it doesn't matter at all, but it was interesting to watch nonetheless. Politicians arguing, trying to get each other to fail or catch them in self-contradicting statements. It's still interesting. And I would say that this was the most interesting of all three of the debates, especially when it gets tighter. There are less people, less dead weight. Sorry to Doug Brigham, Mike Pence, and Asa Hutchinson. They really weren't helping anything. Only these five candidates remained. Again, Chris Christie and Tim Scott barely making the margin, only by a single poll, I think, for Tim Scott that he was eligible for this debate. The other three obviously being more interesting and having more support, so they're in the race longer. And they were the ones to dominate the conversation as well. I actually think that Chris Christie spoke the least out of anyone, and then DeSantis spoke less as well, proportionally. I think Tim Scott got the most time out of anyone, surprisingly, but I think that was just because he speaks much slower. Nikki Haley was really good at just whipping out these statistics, saying them one after another, really being, she was speaking very fast. I usually watch videos in 2 times speed, but still, she was speaking very, very fast, spitting out all these statistics. She said so many during the debate, and she was able to pull so many cards and pieces of evidence against mostly Ron DeSantis and Vivek, obviously, because they're the front runners against her, but she was just a fireball on the stage. And then DeSantis, he was still playing it safe. DeSantis has this problem where I feel like he doesn't really want to be president. He doesn't have that leadership capability. He doesn't have the ability that most presidential candidates, the successful ones at least, have to command a room and take up that presence on stage. He wasn't taking over the stage, which is what you want. And that's one of the problems. Even if Trump wasn't in this race and say these 5 candidates were who we were actually looking for the nomination, it would still be kind of difficult because none of them are that great of options for Republican primary voters and Republican voters in general, because all of them have their own flaws in a certain type of way. All of them are definitely corrupt. And so no matter who you're voting for, you're still losing out on something. You could either have someone who's more action than talk, like Ron DeSantis, or you could have someone who has loads of experience in politics, like Nikki Haley. Some could argue too much experience. Or you have someone who actually has an enormous amount of leadership ability and leadership potential in Vivek. And then Chris Christie and Tim Scott, I think you could get better options. Tim Scott, I really think that he is a good person and everything, and am wary of his leadership capabilities, but Chris Christie I really don't get in any way, shape, or form. I guess if you're really, really adamant on picking a Republican who's absolutely anti-Trump, then I guess he's your guy. None of them are good options. I think Vivek played it interesting on the first stage. He was very good in the first debate. He was this new person. Many people hadn't heard of him, and then just saw him absolutely blossom and become this, take over the stage, really. He took up a lot of time. He spoke a lot. He made points. He was arguing with a lot of people on stage. And in the second debate, he kind of held back. I feel like he tried to become more establishment, which is against his brand completely. And then this debate, he absolutely did not care. I think one of the most memorable moments from the debate was actually Vivek's opening line, or opening statement, in which he criticized the media, and actually the three commentators that you see here. And of course, Vivek criticized them because that's kind of his whole brand, is that he's against like this woke culture and media. And Tim Scott and Chris Christie, they didn't have very memorable moments. I forgot that Chris Christie was on the stage half the time. In the first debate, I think he won after Vivek, but really in this debate, nothing really happened, so it wasn't memorable at all. One of the main things they talked about during the debate was obviously foreign policy, the major thing being Israel, Hamas, Palestine, all that. And they all took the approach of pro-Israel, obviously, as most Republicans do, and they're very adamant on it, really. I think it was Vivek's line where he said that he would advise Bibi, the president of Israel, to smoke the terrorists on his southern border, which Vivek said that he would also do as commander-in-chief on our southern border, which I didn't think that was that relevant. And then he went on to say that we also need a border on the north. I don't know what kind of Canadian terrorists are coming over here. I haven't heard of that thus far. So I was kind of confused where he was going with that, and also making the Israel-Palestine issue, or Israel-Hamas issue, whatever you want to call it, over into our southern border issue. I didn't get that point. I think that issue is prevalent enough and definitely has taken enough lives to become important enough for us to talk about, especially with one of our most powerful allies in the Middle East, which is obviously always having issues that are prevalent and very of high importance. So I was confused where he was going with that. But again, Haley and DeSantis also having similar sentiments. Tim Scott as well. I don't really remember what he said. Again, he wasn't memorable. And then Chris Christie, kind of the only one who kind of deviated, reflecting that he also supports the Muslim community and any pain that they're going through. They kind of all took the same stance. I don't think that any of what they said, except for Chris Christie, would be too controversial, or that they were too different in that ideology. Again, on the topic of foreign policy, which is the main thing on the debate stage, was the topic of China, what Vivek said. Honestly, Vivek made the biggest impression with a lot of things that he said. Again, DeSantis plays it too safe every time. He doesn't seem to want to be president. He's kind of been forced into the role because he had such a successful midterm season in 2022 and is regarded as such a successful governor and everything, but he doesn't have that leadership capability that Obama or Clinton or Reagan or even like Donald Trump had. He doesn't have that energy that takes up the room. So on the topic of China, the most interesting thing, obviously all of them are like anti-China. They want to make sure that the supply chain stays in the U.S., that we're U.S. based, that we sever ties with China in any way that we can, so that we don't have to rely on them, so that we have as little reliance on them, so that, if there were ever to be a military attack, that our economy wouldn't shut down, which is obviously a reasonable take. It's not controversial at all. They're kind of unanimous in this thing, but where they differed was with Vivek criticizing Haley for her former ties to China and like calling China a good friend of the United States as when she was the UN foreign policy ambassador, and then DeSantis saying the same thing, just attacking each other on their histories with foreign policy. That kind of went nowhere, though it was interesting when the topic of China came up. And Vivek was saying that we need to get rid of any ties of U.S. companies with China. The moderator asked him why he's on TikTok. And then Vivek turned it on Nikki Haley and said Nikki Haley's daughter is on TikTok. So she should first control what's going on in her house, and you should have asked her about that, not me, about me using TikTok, because she's made that stance clear already. And that was very contentious. That was a really interesting point of the debate, because usually it's not good, or it's really looked down upon to talk about candidates' children on stage, though Nikki Haley's daughter is 25, so she's a grown woman at this point, but still, Nikki Haley was absolutely fuming after that. It kind of seemed like Nikki Haley came into this debate with an agenda, but then once Vivek poked at her a bit and then made fun of some things, she was just absolutely one off her rocker, and she kind of got skipped out on her agenda. But I do think that with everything, Vivek was attacking a lot of people. I don't think that was too great on his end, because he kind of made for a lot of viral moments, but not necessarily presidential moments. I do think that out of everyone, DeSantis seemed the most presidential, or at least the most presidential that he's seemed in these debates thus far. He still seemed a little shaky and unsure of himself at times. And then another Vivek moment was when he said that Nikki Haley is Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels, and then said that there's two Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels, one Nikki Haley, who obviously wears high heels, and then one DeSantis, because it's alleged that he wears heels in his boots to seem taller, because he's only 5'11" or something. And then Nikki Haley clapped back and said that her heels are they're 5-inch heels and they're used for ammunition, which I don't understand that. Used for ammunition. There was a lot of confusion around what that line meant in particular. There was the topic of Ukraine as well, which obviously all the debates, this was kind of less memorable. Vivek kind of walked himself into a bad situation by saying that Ukraine is a country filled with Nazis and that their comic president is also a Nazi, which again, that doesn't make sense. I don't know where he's going with that. This debate got much more personal with talking about daughters. Haley really came out swinging after that with Vivek. There was a lot of contention between Vivek and Haley. Like, I've been talking about this entire time. DeSantis kind of just in the middle, being like, what's going on here? And then they also touched upon the losses of the Democrats on Tuesday, the losses of the Republicans on Tuesday night in states like Ohio and Virginia. And at the beginning as well, Vivek criticized the RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel, for her failures thus far in leadership. Overall, I don't think that this debate was like made any difference in the polls. It probably just strengthened these three candidates and, deteriorated those of Chris Christie and Tim Scott, which they're already down in the dumps, so I don't see how they can go much more down. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, Trump is still the leading candidate. He's going to be the leading candidate. He's going to become the nominee unless, the Section 3 of Amendment number 14 is, done with it anyway. Oh, the winner, let me say who I thought was the winner of this debate. Honestly, I don't know. Again, it's obviously between these three. I think probably Ron DeSantis was the winner of this debate. He kept a level head. He keeps on getting consecutively better with each of the debates, so I think that he was probably the winner with, Vivek in a second place, Nikki in a third place, and then Tim Scott, then Chris Christie, though they're far behind these top three. So that's that. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.